I serve as Executive Director of Heart Valve Voice US, and I'm moderating today's webinar. The webinar will be recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel shortly afterwards. As you may know, February 22nd is Heart Valve Disease Awareness Day. It's an annual day dedicated to increasing recognition of specific risks and symptoms of heart valve disease and improving detection and treatment and ultimately saving lives. More than 11 million Americans have some form of heart valve disease. For today's discussion, we'll focus on the role of patients as partners in heart valve disease research. Today, we'll briefly walk through the clinical trial process from preclinical testing and protocol development to FDA and IRB review, as well as the different phases of a trial and what happens after a study concludes. We'll talk about why patients may consider participating and how researchers increasingly view patient engagement as a critical part of better science. Beyond recruitment, we'll also explore the role of patient partners as advisors, co-designers, and advocates, and how meaningful engagement can lead to more equitable enrollment, stronger retention, and outcomes that truly matter to patients. We'll also address barriers to participation, including equity considerations, and hear directly from our patient partners on our panel about their experiences, lessons learned, and what they wish researchers understood. You're welcome to ask questions throughout the panel, and we're hoping to have an interactive discussion, so feel free to submit any questions. You don't have to wait until the end of the panel. And I'll kick things off with speaker introductions. I'll start off with Dr. Karen Sapucha.
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Karen Sapuka. I'm a researcher at Mass General Hospital and will be excited to be here today and talk to you about some of the work we're doing and a little bit about research.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Robin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Robin Peacock, and I'm a valve patient and also now Director of Patient Engagement at Heart Valve Voice US.
Thank you, Robin. And I'll turn the floor over to Juan. Oh, I think you're mute.
There we go. I had the mute button. Hi, my name is Juan Wolf. I am a heart valve TAVR recipient, and I'm in line for a mitral valve replacement as well. Cancer survivor and patient advocate for the PCORI study and the shared decision-making tool.
Excellent. Thank you, Juan. And last but not least is Mary Burrell.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Burrell. I'm a hospice patient, survived and saved by a clinical trial. And now I advocate sharing my experience with other people, hoping to bring some peace in their lives and support them in helping making their decisions.
Excellent. Thank you. So first, I'll turn it over to Dr. Karen Sapucha, who will give us a brief overview about clinical trials and why they're essential to advancing heart valve disease research.
Great. All right, so I'm going to be starting to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that well. So really excited to be here today, and thanks so much to Robin and Carissa for putting this together. Excited to talk about research, what it is, and the different ways that you might contribute to research and different ways that patients become part of research teams. So just a little bit more of a background on me, as I mentioned. So I run a group called the Health Decisions Sciences Center, which is at Mass General Hospital. As the name implies, we study medical decisions. So our goal, the goal of our team and the focus of our research is really to help envision a healthcare system where patients are included as a valued part of the care team. And they're not just treated as a body part or a disease to be fixed, but rather really as integral members of that team. And we really want to think about how do we create conversations that really value the expertise of patients and families, their clinicians, the best available clinical evidence to ensure that we've got really well-informed decisions that reflect what matter most to our patients. And so our teams, do this for all kinds of different decision situations. Is it time to get knee replacement surgery? We work with breast cancer patients thinking about decisions about surgery, lumpectomy or mastectomy. And then there's a current study that we're working on right now that's looking at how do we help enhance heart valve teams? How can we help them engage patients in decisions if they're facing decisions about valve replacement surgery? So how do we think about that? And we do this, we study educational materials, so called decision aids. And these are tools that are designed to help patients understand the options, pros and cons of their choices. We create some skills training for clinicians, helping them communicate more effectively and help them listen to their patients. We design surveys to figure out how to measure, like, do any of these interventions work? Are we improving the quality of a decision? And what does that really look like? And then we run a lot of quality improvement projects to make sure that when something works in research, that we're putting it into practice. And so today, we're going to be talking about research. So we wanted to get a little sense for you. I don't know if we have a chat function here. If not, okay, people can maybe put this in the chat. So I want to just ask for the audience, what's been your involvement in research? Have you never been involved in a research study, perhaps? But maybe you're interested in thinking about what that might mean. Maybe you've participated in a clinical trial as part of your care. Maybe you've even worked as an advisor or a collaborator on a medical study, and maybe you're not really sure if you've done any of these things, but if you could, maybe put it in the chat, and then I don't know, Chris, if you're able to see what the chat's.
Hopefully everyone can put their feedback into the chat. And hoping to read out your answers on live.
Okay. All right, well, while people are do that, the next few slides are just thinking about, here are some common things that we'll often hear when we're talking to patients about clinical trials. And so I want you to be thinking about, you don't have to put anything in the chat, just thinking whether you think this is true or false. If I join a clinical trial, I'll probably just get a placebo. So I know people are thinking about true or false. Well, and while certainly some clinical trials do have a placebo arm, and a placebo means you're not getting any active treatment. It might be like a sugar pill or even like a sham kind of surgery. And so as we will learn, many trials are comparing new treatments or experimental treatments to usual care, which often means other standard treatments. So there's actually very few trials that use placebos. So it's not actually the case that you might get a placebo. So this is actually not necessarily a true statement. So here's another comment that people have made. So clinical trials are only a last resort. True or false? And again, here, actually, clinical trials are often available throughout a patient's journey from, testing through treatment and even after treatment's completed. And it's not always about this sort of last chance, like you have to have exhausted all other treatments before you would even think about a clinical trial. So we do encourage people to be thinking about trials, not just as something as a last resort. And then another thing we might hear, clinical trials are dangerous, true or false? Now, it can certainly be scary to think about being involved in a trial with a new treatment or something that's experimental. But one thing to remember, and one thing I'll talk a little bit about more in a bit, many of these treatments have been tested and have been through many, many years of studies in the lab and with other patients. So it's pretty rare that you were involved in the very first kind of testing of a treatment. So often there's a lot of evidence and data about what's been happening and what these treatments might do. And then clinical trials also follow very strict protocols that have to be reviewed by lots of committees called the IRB, Institutional Review Board, to minimize the risk to patients and make sure that that risk is acceptable. And the other interesting part of clinical trials is that in many cases, when you're in a clinical trial, you actually get more close monitoring, extra attention from doctors and the care team, which can actually often result in better outcomes than people getting care outside of clinical trials. So not always the case. This one is also false. So let's talk about the types of research. There are different kinds of research. And one thing that's interesting is understanding the research pipeline. So where do things start? And often we start, let's see if we can get that, basic research. So this is sort of maybe the traditional picture you have of researchers. They're in a lab, they're wearing white coats, they've got goggles on, and they're looking in under microscopes like with petri dishes and studying sort of the basic functions of cells or proteins or genes. And this is basic research. The goal of a lot of basic science is not necessarily to actually develop a cure for a disease. It's really just to advance the knowledge of some fundamental processes and structures, how things work, to get us better understanding. The next step in the pipeline is called translational research. And here's where we start to try, as the name implies, translate those basic findings into clinical advances, maybe a new test or treatment. So you might have found a new protein or understood what this protein does, and now we'll try to target that with a drug to try to potentially advance or treat some disease. And then if it's promising in that translational research setting, it goes into clinical research. And this is where we start to interact in terms of interacting with patients on research studies. So these clinical research is all about testing new treatments in humans. And we're going to focus on this bucket in more detail, but I want you to understand that once it gets to clinical research, it's already been through a lot of years of study for, decades or maybe even longer. So here, if we kind of zoom in on the clinical research bucket, one thing to understand is there's 4 phases of clinical research. And as you can imagine, each phase you kind of have more patients going through and you learn more about the particular test or treatment that is being evaluated. So phase 1 trials, and these examples are mainly for like medicines, but you could think about this for a device or some other type of treatment as well. But when you're doing a phase 1 trial, this really is that very first time it's ever been used, possibly in a human. And these trials are maybe like 10 people, maybe 20. So not very many people are involved. And really the purpose of that phase 1 trial is to figure out, can we give a safe dose? What is the dose that's safe? What's the safety profile of this medicine or treatment? And when we look at all the different treatments that go through phase 1 trials, about 70% might progress on, meet their safety goals, and progress on to that next phase. So that next phase is phase 2. So once we understand how this treatment can be given safely in humans, these trials are really what we want is, does it actually work? And so these are the ones that often are compared to a placebo, where we're just trying to get some evidence of, does this seem to be doing what we hope it's doing? These are also really small and very tightly controlled trials, meaning they're very carefully selecting patients to participate in these trials. Maybe there's like 20 to 100 people in them, so very, very small studies as well. And it's a bigger hurdle to get through. So when we look at like all of this medications or treatments that are going through phase 2 trials, only about a third of them are actually going to progress to that next phase of phase 3. So this is phase 3 trials are next. These are a bit bigger. So now we might be having hundreds or even 1,000 patients participate. Often these are going across the country. And sometimes these are evaluated, most of these are evaluated in studies that might be randomly assigning people to get this new treatment versus the existing kind of standard of care type treatment. So usually it's not just a placebo, it's usually more standard of care. And these are really the exciting ones to figure out, okay, is this really going to work the way we hope it will work? And about a quarter to a third of treatments will progress on to that next phase that will meet that, the trial comes out positive and they'll be moving on. Now, after phase 3 is a pretty big milestone because that's when you'll get FDA approval to use that test or treatment more widely. And then once you have FDA approval, then it can be used by any doctor. It doesn't have to be used within the context of a clinical trial. But that doesn't mean we don't want to still learn about this drug or test or treatment. So we do have phase 4 trials that study what happens when these are started and being used as part of routine care. So we don't have that careful patient selection that we have in the clinical trials. We might not have as careful monitoring, and we can learn a lot about what's going on with these medications when they're starting to be used. And this whole process, as you can imagine, can take a long time, maybe a decade or more, and millions and millions of dollars to kind of fund all of these research efforts. But this is how we get new, tests and treatments out and available, and then, insurance companies will start to pay for them and reimburse patients so that they'll be able to be used. But as you can imagine, research doesn't stop there. So after the clinical trials and tests, this sort of research bucket with the clinical trials and testing, then, these treatments are approved and put to use, not just with a couple hundred people, but thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And then they'll use them for years and years and years. So try to figure out, how do we learn about what happens to these tests and treatments when they're implemented in these different settings? And that's what's called health services research. And that's sort of really the area that I'm looking at, which is trying to figure out, well, how effective is this treatment when used in routine care, especially when people might not always take medicine or the treatment exactly as directed, or maybe they have other, how does it interact with the other kinds of treatments or medicines that they're using? How does the pricing of this treatment influence doctors' recommendations for it or patients' use of it? And there's a whole field of research called health services research that really focuses on how does the organization, the financing and delivery of care impact outcomes. Now, there are many reasons to join a clinical trial. And, I think you might have your own reasons, and it'd be interesting to hear from some of the other panelists too about, joining trials and what their experience was like. But, for one, it's really the best way we can help find ways to diagnose and treat disease. We really want to make sure that we are making advances in science and doing better for our patients. I think trials are really often a way to have access to new treatments, which can be, really helpful. The outcomes are often better for those who are enrolled in trials or who get the treatment through the trial compared to those who aren't getting treatment in the trial. And then I think it's also important, trials really offer a way for patients to contribute to the future care, creating a better path for others. And I think that's a lot of, really important reasons to join trials. However, for any specific trial, if you're offered one, really making sure there's an idea of informed consent. So the goal is to make sure that you're asking questions about whether this makes sense for you. What are the, potential benefits or the potential risks as you're thinking about joining, and making sure that you get good information so that you're making an informed decision about joining that trial. And hopefully we're going to have some time for, questions. This is just a really short overview of trials. And, hopefully we'll hear more about how Heart Valve Voice and Robin and others can help identify relevant trials for you. What's sort of the latest and greatest going on for heart valve treatment. But maybe I'll take a quick stop to see if there's any questions before we move on to the next section, which is talking about patients as partners in trials.
Yes, thank you so much, Karen. We do have a comment in the chat. There's someone that mentioned that they usually think of clinical trials as risky. Do you have any steps or just any feedback on how patients can maybe overcome that framework of thinking and just get a better understanding of what clinical trials are in a whole?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really common, being nervous about what does this mean? How, is this new, experimental? Some people get excited by that, and then some people get a little nervous with that. I think this idea of informed consent, which is, really critical for every trial, tries to lay out what are the potential benefits, both to you as, a person taking a new drug or treatment, and then also the potential risks. So those should be something that, if you have worries about that you should really be asking your physician or whoever you're talking with. Maybe there's a nurse coordinator who's describing the trial, but you should be able to get some good information about that. Nothing is without risk. Regular treatments have risk. So, unfortunately, everything that we might be considering, whether it's a trial, a treatment within a trial, or a treatment outside of a trial, comes with sort of benefits and risks. And so, I think always figuring out what's, are there additional risks that you might be taking on with the trial? Often it's also additional logistics, like you might have to come for more testing or more frequent scans or things that might be logistically sort of a, something that you'd want to think, is that really worth it to me to do this?
Awesome. Thank you
I don't
so
know if others on
much.
the panel have some, comments on that as well, in terms of feeling like it's a little risky to do.
Thank you, Karen. We do have another question in the chat. Are there clinical trials targeted to women only, and how we will go about finding those?
That is a great question. I think it really varies. Certainly there's some conditions that are female only, or predominantly female only. When I was doing a lot of breast cancer research, we often would have, studies that did have, focus on, females. I'm not sure for in heart disease whether they do that. I know traditionally there's been, when they first did a lot of the research of the clinical trials, it was mostly men that were recruited. So a lot of the evidence that we have isn't as balanced as we would want it. So, I mean, I do think it's really important to understand when you're thinking about what do we know about our tests and treatments, and making sure that for whatever population we're interested in, does that trial really reflect me? Are the people in the trial, do they look like me? Or they, have the same sort of characteristics so that I can understand and use those data to help me?
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. Robin, Mary, Juan, do you have anything to add?
I think that
I
Karen, oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, one.
I just wanted to say that part of my background is having survived many life-threatening illnesses from HIV to different cancers, and of course, my TAVR also saved my life. And I've been riding the edge of medical technology for a very long time through clinical trials that have, in many cases, basically saved my life. Um, Starting with HIV in 1999, things weren't working. And I entered a trial for a Fusion medication, which was a brand new class of HIV medication that's literally saved my life. There's always a little bit of a fear, and depending on each patient's situation, this can vary. If you have more room for decision making, then your options are broader. But what I have found is that by the time a clinical trial lands on the opportunity for a patient to try it, so many roadblocks and so many safety and efficacy barriers have been passed that is usually pretty secure and people are very clear on what the risks are. So I tend personally, this is just my own vision, I generally tend to think that clinical trials are pretty safe to engage with. And usually the results are optimal in my own experience.
Thank you, Juan.
I saw in the chat that someone was talking about how their doctor hasn't mentioned any clinical trials to them yet. If you're interested in learning more, I know Carissa has put in the chat 2 different links to clinical trial registries, I guess, if that's the right word. The other thing is, please reach out to us at Heart Valve Voice, and we are always interested in meeting people who would like to be part of valve research on the patient panel side. So, and you can always ask your doctor and search the hospital that you're at.
That's great advice. Thank you, Robin. Okay, I'll turn it back over to you, Karen.
Okay, great. So now I want to focus a bit on what's been a really exciting and sort of new approach to doing research, which is really engaging patients as partners on the research team. And, it's just a really exciting sort of area. So patient-centered research. So I would say that the work that our team has always been doing, focused on medical decision making, making sure that, we're developing interventions to help patients get more informed, make sure they have all the information they need and that they're really listened to. We've been doing patient-centered research. So it's all about the patient. And that's important, but it's not the same thing as engaging patients in research. So that's what the little distinction that we're going to be talking about here. And I want to talk about the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. This is an organization that was started back in 2010. And the reason I want to bring this organization in is because these guys have really, I think through their work, have really challenged the research community to rethink how research is conducted. So the mission for PCORI is to help people make informed healthcare decisions, improving delivery and outcomes by promoting and producing high quality evidence. And evidence and research here in bold that's guided by patients, caregivers, and the broader healthcare community. So they really are encouraging and requiring all people doing research with funding from PCORI, so they're a large funder of medical research, to have patients as co-investigators and collaborators on research grants. And so here's a quote from a PCORI researcher that I think really illustrates how transformative it can be to have patient partners involved in the design and conduct of research. And so from their perspective, it was immediately apparent that the patient partners had things to add that we weren't thinking about at all. It went from this notion of let's have an advisory board to really understand that if this was going to work, the patients had to be central to the whole thing. And so it's not a quote from me, but it's actually a pretty good job of reflecting what my experience has been when we've started to really have patient partners really integrated into the research team and involved, not just sort of at the end of the study, but from the very beginning of the study. And now PCORI has a model that sets out, their expectations for patient partnerships, and they also have a lot of resources to help both the researchers and the patients really succeed as collaborators on these research proposals. So for me as a researcher, if I'm putting in a proposal to PCORI to try to fund a research study, I have to describe in detail, like several pages of my engagement plan. How am I going to work with patients? How am I going to work with all the different stakeholder partners on this project? We need to have engaged them from the proposal process. So they need to be involved in the study design and how are we thinking about things. We need to fund them in the budget. So we're actually paying them as, paid, employees and partners on that grant. And then we have to think about how are we going to work together? How are we going to bridge, these different kind of disciplines? And how do we make sure that that's all working? And what's interesting about PCORI is they don't just say that others need to do it, they hold themselves accountable too. And it's really unique among funders, at least in my experience. When we try to get a grant funded, it goes through what's called a peer review process. And so they have 5 reviewers for each grant that gets submitted to PCORI. There are 2 researchers, there's 1 statistician, and then there's 2 patient and stakeholder partners that are actually reviewing the grants. And so they get to vote on which grants get funded and which don't get funded. And they're really looking to see which ones really have meaningful engagement of patients. So it's a really, all the way through the process with PCORI, they're making sure that patients are playing a role in which questions get asked and which questions get funded. And there's obviously different types of input. It starts by making sure that as researchers that we're asking the right questions. Oftentimes, researchers might be interested in different things than patients. And so making sure that we've got, all of the agendas aligned and that we're asking questions that are going to get answers that make sense and are meaningful to patients is really important. For my studies, we've had a lot of, advisory committees, and often they're helping us figure out not just like what are the right questions to ask, what are the most important outcomes to collect. Oftentimes, as researchers, we might just say, oh, we just want whatever's going to be in the electronic medical record. It's easy to kind of track. But, patients might push back and say, well, actually, I want to know, like, when am I going to be able to get back to work? Or how is this going to impact, my physical functioning? And things that aren't necessarily as easily tracked. So we need to figure out better ways or different ways to kind of collect that type of information. And I know, from my experience, we had an advisory committee for a quality improvement project that was looking to try to integrate patient decision aids. These are educational videos for routine orthopedic care. And our patient partners said, this is great. I'm glad you're giving patient information and making sure that we kind of do our homework and are, well prepared for that visit. But they challenged us to go further because they said this idea of shared decision making, that we're really working collaboratively with our doctors, mean that the surgeons need to listen to us and respect our goals and preferences. So how are you going to know if that's happened? And so that led us to really rethink the design of our project. And we ended up surveying the docs to figure out, did they actually understand what was most important to the patient? And it led to the design of a new intervention that was really targeted towards the surgeons. At first, we were a little, saying, oh, we don't want to disrupt the surgeons. They're so busy. We want them to do the study. And then, having those patient partners say, no, we need to go a little further. It's, really important to have, dismantling those barriers that we had put up. And they said, no, we've got to do it. So it makes a big difference. This is a feedback from one of our patient partners that was involved in that project. And, just reflecting on their experiences. And I think it's new, I think you see that. He was actually a partner at a law firm, but had a back surgery. So he's working with us on that orthopedic project. So it's new for patients. It's kind of new for the researchers. And sometimes there's a little bit of, getting to know you and how do we work best together. But, I think the idea that this really is the way to get really that transformative quality into studies, how do we really rethink and make sure that these studies are, doing better, and that they really are getting better benefits. And I think PCORI has started to try to collect some evidence around what happens when studies have patient partners really engaged in the research, and they are finding evidence that it higher chance of funding, that they actually have better enrollment rates, and that they're doing better in terms of the quality of the study. So with that, I might just stop sharing. So then I think we can, happy to answer more questions about this part. Excited to hear from panelists about their experiences as participants in trials and as sort of patient partners on studies.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Karen. We haven't received any more questions in the chat or Q&A on this segment, but I would like to turn it over to some of our patient advocates on the panel and just kind of share or learn more about your experiences on how patient engagement helped improve your research experience. And I'll start with Robin.
I'm sorry. I was just looking up the run of shows. Sorry.
All right.
What was the question?
Just to share or learn more from the advocates on our panel, just to learn more about how your personal experience within
Thank
clinical
you.
trials or research helped shape your patient experience overall.
Oh, thank you so much. Sorry about that. So I've been both part of a study and part of patient panels, and both have been great experiences. One was just a genetic study on bicuspid aortic valve. That was 20 years ago. And now I'm a patient partner on a couple of different research studies. It's fulfilling. It's fulfilling. So how has it changed me and my journey? It absolutely, it validates what I've been through. And in terms of being able to help others and people that are coming up behind me. I've had a very positive experience with my patient panels. Research teams are all very different. And so, learning how their teams and their protocol, it's very interesting to be on a couple of different ones with different teams. But I feel so grateful to the people who came before me that were part of the clinical studies for my heart valve, that it just means the world to me to help the people that are going to be coming up from behind. And I think it's just amazing. It's a great opportunity.
Thank you so much, Robin. Mary, I would love to know your thoughts on this as well.
I participated in one clinical trial, and it really wasn't a choice for me. I was at the end of my lifespan, according to the doctors. So when I was introduced to the clinical trial, I participated. I was all in for it. I couldn't wait to get started. That experience led me to what I do today. I am pulled significantly. I'm empowered to share my experience with other people because what we don't know can hurt us. And so I encourage anybody who's listening and doesn't know much about clinical trials to reach out to one of us on the panel, do your work because it can make a difference in your life.
For sure. And Juan, anything to share on this?
Yes. I agree with Mary. Like sometimes it takes for you to be on the edge in order to enroll or participate on a trial. And I think that one of the important things about this webinar is to dispel any fear that may be there because the safety features of a trial are incredible. I had the fortune of working with an investigational doctor for HIV medications in the early 2000s for about 4 or 5 years. And I was a study monitor or study manager. I filled out the forms to send to the FDA and all of that. So to see how a protocol works and actually the work that PCORI is doing right now It's amazing because really we're putting the patient back in the center of the conversation. Those trials, I had to jump through so many hoops just to participate on them when my life was on the line. And also, I also want to say that depending on, this is my own experience and it's in my case, it's what I'm going through right at this moment. I had been waiting for a TAVR, transaortic valve replacement for my mitral valve. My mitral valve and aortic valve have both been damaged over the last 40 years as a result from cobalt radiation therapy that I received in 1982. And they advised me about this. They literally said, we hope that the technology is good enough to save your life when your heart falls apart. And this was at the MD Anderson Cancer and Tumor Institute in Texas. But and the technology is here. And depending on your case, depending on what it is that you're moving through, there is room. I think that one of the most important things for the patient is to have some sense of internal stability so that the choices that are made are made from a well-informed position rather than a rather emotional or lack or fearful position. I waited for my TAVR. I had my first heart episode in 2008, and the transaortic valve replacement for my aortic valve wasn't approved yet, and I was too healthy to qualify for the study. So I waited until 2015. I waited 7 years. And during those 7 years, I did everything that I needed to do to maintain the health of my heart. And then I had it, and it changed my life. Same thing with a aortic valve, with a mitral valve. And where I am right now is that I waited, and the surgery was finally approved at the beginning of this year, and now it's too late for me. The stenosis has grown too large, and inserting a valve in the middle of it is no longer viable. So I have to go back to other options, which is what we were trying to avoid for other reasons. But so timing, your case, what you know about your conditions, especially with your heart, is really important to get well educated and to find out. In 2008, a doctor wanted to crack my chest open, and that was my biggest fear because my sternum, my chest bone, will not fuse back together again. And I found out about the TAVR study, and that's what allowed me to really wait. So knowing your options in regards to available studies for whatever your condition is, to understanding your case as best as you can, gives you the ability to calmly be able to make the best choice that is good for you as an individual. Every patient is different, and every patient has a set of options that is unique to them.
Thank you so much, Juan. That's really insightful. I know we had some earlier questions in the chat about just being worried about the riskiness of participating in trials. So I think your sentiments, as well as Robin and Mary's, are a great value add for hopefully some of our patients on the line. To pivot a bit, I'd like to share or ask you all some of the challenges or considerations you may have faced before serving as a patient partner. And Robin, I'll pick on you again and start with you first.
So some of the things you need to consider before you agree to be on a patient panel is the time commitment, and make sure that you understand how long the study is to go for and what the requirements are in terms of monthly meetings. In the beginning, for one of my studies, we were meeting frequently because we were designing some shared decision-making materials. And so we needed to really keep giving our input to the team. The other thing that I want to make sure everyone understands is that you can stop being part of a study as a patient partner at any time. And so life happens, and all of your participation is valuable. So whether you are not able to see the study through, your input up to date is still super valuable. I think for me, that was kind of, I just needed to know the time commitment. And I also really wanted to get to know the people on the panel. I wanted to understand who I would be working alongside with because it is a team effort. And I think that those that join a patient panel, one of the greatest skills is listening to others and applauding their input, but also being able to not be afraid to tell the researchers that we don't like what they gave us. So you can't be 100% people pleaser to always say, "Oh, that's great, that's great." No, you absolutely have to be able to have a strong voice and say, "This is a super start. However, dot dot dot." So I think those were my considerations.
Thanks so much, Robin. I know Mary is currently off camera for a bit, but I'll turn to you, Juan. Do you have any thoughts or considerations that you may have took in before joining a trial?
Um, well, to join a trial, it's good to really understand what the protocol is, what is your participation, what are the risks. All of that information is incredibly important. Different trials have different risk versus benefits. And it's very much a very personal decision. In regards to heart valve, I think that uh, it's about the technology and it's about what best supports you. Like right now, I'm in conversation with my heart surgeon whether to have SAVR, the surgical valve replacement, or to have the robotic arms, which would be done at a hospital in a different state because in Colorado we don't have the equipment. And there are other risks associated with that. So I'm in the middle of this decision making, and my participation on the PCORI study has helped me so much deeply understand what my options are and what my voice is. And after having so many life altering experiences with medical conditions and life threatening illnesses and all of this, I'm still here. And I've kind of like have grown a little numb about the impact, even though I remember the first time, the first cancer diagnosis, how impactful that was for me. And now how I have a different attitude towards this diagnosis. There's a sense of gratitude that I'm still here. And at the same time, there is a sense of I am going to do what is best for me in the long term. I'm also, every time that I join a study or select a surgery or take a course of action in regards to my health, I'm thinking about how is this going to affect me down the line. When I was 18 and I received the radiation, I just did what the doctor told me. And now I have this condition because of that. And it's not that they did anything wrong or that I did anything wrong. It's just that having organizations such as this that give the patient a voice, not only to speak how we feel and what our options are, but really to learn to understand what is going on. People don't grow up thinking that they're going to understand every medical condition in their bodies. It only happens when a diagnosis comes in. So to learn about that is so important. And that would be my biggest advice to patients. Learn about what you're going through as much as you can. Investigate what studies and opportunities are available to you and make your choice from an informed place rather than an emotional or fearful place.
Thank you so much, Juan.
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
I think that Juan makes an excellent point in terms of, there's two different paths that we're talking about here. There's participating in the research itself, and the considerations to join that, I think, are much greater in terms of what's right for you versus, where I was talking about just being the patient partner on the research study, advising the study and the development of the study. And I think Juan makes an excellent argument for all of the things you need to consider when you are working on your own health and being offered different treatment options. And the reason why the patient panels are so important is because we're helping create the decision materials to help patients like Juan and all of you listening today to make informed decisions. And we're helping the clinicians with materials in patient speak, if there's any other way to say it, you know. So I just want to make sure we understand there's a distinction of what we consider between being a patient partner on a panel versus a participant in a research study.
Yes, and that's a good point to make. And that was what we were hoping to do with this webinar, just making the distinction between the two. I do want to
That's great.
highlight a comment in the chat that they feel very empowered by listening to you all today. So I just wanted to give you all a quick shout out and thank you so much for just sharing your stories and experiences.
Sure. I mean, we're here to help.
Yes. Okay. And Robin, I'll turn to you again. I know we had another question in the chat before about women and valve disease, but are there any considerations women should take before they join a clinical trial? Is it, maybe something that they should take in consideration versus men participating in a clinical trial, or why it may be more important for women to get involved in valve disease research?
From Karen mentioned it, where a lot of research studies to date have not been, women have not been heavily researched. And so a lot of our treatment options today are based more on a male research study than all female. I do believe there was, maybe it's in Europe, I'll have to find the link and I could post it. There has, I thought, been one study that was all female. I could be wrong, but I'll find that out. Considerations for a woman, gosh, I mean, you can open that door. To be part of a clinical research trial takes time and effort and energy, right? And so you have to be able to get to the clinic. And so these are things that the researchers are considering as well. And Karen, help me out here with, when they're creating a research study, a lot of time it's access to the study, right? If you live in rural America and you want to be part of a research study, you need to get if it's a situation where you need labs drawn or you need to make certain visits to clinics, you've got childcare, transportation, you've got someone at home taking over your responsibilities at home and at work while you leave to go. There's so many considerations, and men have the same considerations, absolutely. But I think that there's a lot to consider. I know some of the conversations we've had with some PCORI people, researchers, is, do people have internet access, right? And so there's all sorts of considerations, and just know that the great teams of researchers out there are working on, trying to help solve some of these hurdles. And because everybody needs access to participate either as a patient partner or in these clinical research trials. Mary probably has some great ideas since she's heavily involved in participating in a clinical research. Mine was a simple situation. So I can't really speak for, other than they offered it to me and I said, sure. And I was at the hospital, they drew my blood and that was it. So I think Mary has a much better story.
If I may, just share. I'm a woman with complex anatomy. I was too high risk. I was too different. And it was because my avocado-shaped heart. I was placed in hospice because there were no other options. Innovation reached me when somebody decided patients like me were worth studying. And that's exactly why women in heart valve disease should consider becoming patient partners. We need more women participating. And if you're interested, please reach out to any one of us on the panel. We can certainly direct you to information that can help with that process.
Of course. Thank you so much, Mary. And Juan, I would just like to turn to you a bit. As a Hispanic male, can you just share a little bit on why participating as a patient partner is so important for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yes. Um, I I think that sometimes when we are moving through one of these experiences, it's hard to express ourselves and be heard with our concerns, especially the way that a lot of the medicine had been viewed for years in the past. That's one of the things that I really admire about the PCORI organization, about bringing the patient back to the center of the conversation. Being a patient partner gives you a platform to voice your concerns, to explain the perspective of the patient, to be included in the whole dynamic of healthcare. And that is something that is incredibly valuable. The patient's experience is a wealth of information. It is a level of understanding and comprehension that most clinicians, and this is nothing wrong on them, they've done nothing wrong, but most clinicians need to understand at a deeper level. And they could only understand truly if they were patients themselves, which most times very few are. And those who have been through life-altering diseases, they're the ones that really get a lot of patients, and they really collaborate in all of this. So only those of us who have survived these experiences can speak of what it's like to be in it. And when we add that to the huge recipe of an approval process, to include what it is like to be in it while these processes are happening, is a level of support that the patient, without even knowing it, really hungers for. And then once you've participated in a study, your voice becomes important. Like, I have been in many studies in my life, and now I'm speaking to you right now. And I got to tell you, it feels like this is my life purpose. This is why I survive, so that I can share about this to you and hopefully empower you for you to have the best path towards your highest health, that you can make the best choice regarding your heart valve or anything else in your life that is needs attention.
Yes, thank you so much. And that's really insightful to share. I hope, yes, thank
Beautiful.
yes. I hope everyone can take away that key nugget of information. I know we're getting close to closing, but for everyone on the panel, are there any personal anecdotes you would like to share? Even you, Karen, if there's anything from the professional side, and patient partners as research that you would like to share with the audience, now's the time to share. Anyone? Feel free to go first.
Okay,
I'm happy to, yeah, you go on because I, yeah.
so I already shared some of my experience, and having being a person living with 40 years, living with HIV, 5 different cancers, all all healed on the first treatment. None of them are return cancers. So somehow my body has just chosen to do these things. And this is the perspective that I have. It's not that I am sick, but that I am moving through this experience. And it may sound naive, but I truly think that the reason why I'm alive is because I wanted to. You have to want to. You have to trust your own process. And in doing so, you're empowered to make the best choices for yourself. And also, you can really survive. And my wish is that more of us can um, be strong, and that medicine continues to create these amazing miracles. I mean, I went for my heart valve. I was in the hospital at 8 in the morning. The surgery was at noon. At 3:30 in the afternoon, I was back home with a replaced aortic valve. To me, that's crazy. It's crazy. And yet it's happening. And now I'm about to have some kind of magical new surgery with robotic arms coming in and cutting stenosis out and putting another valve in. And it's like, really, it seems like are we on the Jetsons yet? You know? And I also, there's fear. I have to admit, I'm terrified of what I'm going to choose and how I'm going to do this. Um, and I use that fear and turn it into excitement on what is possible. And I've also have settled into all the possibilities, whether I will continue to be here on this planet or not. And there is such a level of freedom of being able to sit in the center of that storm and just look at all of it and just say, this is where I am. And taking it in one small step at a time. And I hope that this inspires everybody to move through and just, you can do this.
Yes. Thank you so much, Juan. Love to hear it.
I think what Juan and Mary and so many people in the advocacy world put out there is mindset is so important, and we get these diagnoses and it's tough. But your mindset of going through it is so important to try to find the glimmers each day, to try to find the gratefulness, to even if it's just looking outside and seeing that it's not raining today. I mean, that can be a glimmer for some people, right? And I just feel like that's been the biggest change for me is my mindset post my open heart surgery. And everyone I meet, like Juan is so inspiring. Mary, you're so inspiring. And, just everybody on this advocacy train, I guess is what we'll call it. We just have to appreciate each day because tomorrow is not promised. And we're so grateful for the research that came before us. And that's why we're giving back to the research for the future.
Definitely. Thank you, Robin. And Karen, I'm not sure if there's anything you would like to share as a final parting word on the professional side.
I think just, I think acknowledging how important and how powerful it is to have the patient partners on these teams. It really just grounds us in ways, you can get kind of going in your day and doing work. And, Robin and I were talking a little bit about, one of our projects earlier saying we were just looking at some data and she was saying, oh, like that's scary data. And we were just thinking of it as data and not thinking of all the people behind all of those numbers and just wanting to make sure it's so important and powerful to have those patient voices with us, and so we really appreciate you taking the time because we know you have other things, you have lives and jobs and things, but so taking the time to really help us do this better is just wonderful. So we really appreciate all that.
Thank you, Karen. And Mary, any thoughts to add?
Excuse me, I'd like to share that when patients don't sit at the table, these decisions about our health um, get made without us. And so when patients help shape research from the very beginning, from the inside, then that really truly reflects our lives that we're living. Fairness has to be built in from the start. And it's going to take all of us to participate in that. And so, again, I really encourage people who have no clue about clinical trials, or maybe they have a little bit of knowledge about it, to really research it, because that's the only way you're going to make that decision whether a trial is for you or not. Don't listen to other people's stories. It's their story, not yours.
And that's an excellent point to end on, Mary. Thank you all again for taking the time out just to share your experiences on patient partners and research. Again, we want to wish everyone a happy Heart Valve Disease Awareness Day this Sunday. And we hope to have this webinar up by tomorrow or maybe by Monday at the latest. So hopefully we can amplify that throughout the weekend or week as we continue to celebrate. For more information, you're welcome to visit heartvalvevoice-us.org, and I'll put that in the chat as well. And we also have information about clinical trial participation, just general valve disease information as well. So feel free to reach out to Robin and I if you have any follow-up questions. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank
All right,
you.
take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.